Over the past several hours, we've been talking about how Indians across the spectrum look at the India story, whether these are members of the government or members of the opposition. Looked at from the outside, what does the rest of the world make of the India story at this moment? To talk about this, we're joined at the 21st edition of the India Today Conclave by a very special guest, all the way from Switzerland, the President of the World Economic Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a very warm round of applause for Borge Brende, please? Thank you very much for coming down. You were here just in March, so to come back again so soon after your last visit is very special, and we deeply appreciate this. So thank you, Mr. Brende, for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be back where there is optimism.
Oh, fantastic. Because yes, indeed, India is one of the points in the world where there is spark and optimism, given some of the gloom that we're seeing. On a macro level, given where India is at this moment, how do you at the World Economic Forum see India's position change on the global high table?
So, firstly, congratulations on the conclave. Great to be here. This is India's century. India is the fastest growing of the large economies in the world. Remember when we met in Davos, I said to some of your colleagues that we expected almost 8% economic growth in India, at least at the last quarter last year. And they said that I was too optimistic. We have now seen the numbers. I would say they were too pessimistic. So on India, we are very bullish. And it's not only for this year or next year. We foresee that India will be growing for the next 25 years, provided, of course, that the reforms are continuing. And it's not only that it's growing, but it's also growing at a pace that is helping and supporting the rest of the world. I think many would be surprised if they learn that 15% of all global growth last year came from India. So one single country providing 15% of the global growth. So it's, of course, then creating jobs in India and opportunities, but it's also a win-win. It's also, with its demand, creating opportunities for the rest of the world. So we do expect that India will meet the 10 trillion US dollar economy in the next decade. We do predict that India very soon will be the third largest economy in the world. And then I also launched an interview with you last year, this notion of G3. So and I think the G3 is no effect.
So let's speak about that for a moment, because as you can see, Borge is a very strong India bull. And you coined this idea of G3, which went viral in India, and everybody here loves you for that. But internationally, there was a bit of a pushback, saying that, you've left out, say, Europe, you're overestimating the size of the India story, and it's not as bullish and optimistic as you'd like to believe. Given that almost a year has passed since, do you think we're closer to achieving the idea of a G3, or do you think we're drifting further away?
I think it's there, because you have the US economy as the largest in the world, China number 2. And there is just now a question of months before India will take the role as the third largest economy in the world. Of course, you can have this notion of G3 that I coined. Of course, you can also say there is like a G4 or G5 or a G7 that we currently have. But I know that for India now, it will continue, if the reforms continue, to be at the forefront of growth. And very interestingly, we are now seeing that the emerging economies of the world, where India is now among the real leaders, together with China, is now 50% of all the global growth comes from the emerging economies. And that will continue for the next decade when it comes to growth, according to the economic statistics that we are looking at. And from 2040, we are expecting that the emerging economies will be accounting for 60% of the overall global growth. So this is like a snowball. And you know, a snowball is small at the beginning, but if it starts to roll, it gets bigger, and then it rolls faster. And that's India today.
Wow. You know, in case you didn't follow what Borge had said earlier, he said that the coming decade will be the decade of the G3, which is the United States, China, and India. The difference that I'm picking up from what you said last time to now is that you're saying that the G3 is already here. So it's not a concept that you'd explained as being the reality of the future. You're saying we're almost there, already there. That's the difference now.
10 years ago, India was the 10th largest economy in the world. Today, India is the 4th largest economy in the world. It's incredible. And very soon the 3rd largest economy in the world. So I think the G3 coining, I think I'm very confident that that will hold, and it will even then develop further, because the growth is faster now in India. And of course, there's a lot of things working in India's favor. The geopolitics is working in India's favor, because there is a change in the global value chains. So you do see a lot of companies then establishing themselves and production and manufacturing in India. Secondly, you have so much of a youth surplus. You have one of the youngest populations in the world. So 75% of your population are in an age where they can contribute to work. And on top of this, you also have fiscal prudence. It's maybe a bit boring, but it is extremely important, because you see a lot of indebted countries that are using most of their money now on paying on their debt, the interest. India has been able to be fiscally prudent, and there are reforms. The reforms have to continue, though, as
so let's
I said.
spend a moment on that, because you've spoken about what you think is going right. Give us your sense of what more you'd like to see from India and from the next Indian government to be able to achieve the target of being a $10 trillion economy beyond the reforms that have been implemented at this moment. What are the structural reforms that you'd like the next government to push?
Get rid of more red tape, more infrastructure investments. That is already happening. You know, it is real momentum there. Investing even more in education. Every child in India should have access to good primary and secondary education. And that's building also of the strength of India today, where India is very digitally literate. So taking into consideration is 1.4 billion people, and even a little bit more than that, the digitally connecting is at a very high level. So no one has to capitalize on that. I think also to be a real hub for manufacturing. We see the 2nd largest economy in the world, China, is 30% of all global manufacturing is happening in China. We are seeing more companies now establishing themselves in India too, but I think there you also have to look at the tariffs, because today manufacturing is getting input factors from different countries. So you get part of it from Bangladesh, you get something from Malaysia, something from Vietnam, but you would like to put it all together in your country, and then you produce higher up in the value chain, you got the profit, you can pay people better salaries. And of course then you have to also look at the tariffs on those products, input factors that you put into that production and manufacturing. But all this, I think, is gradually happening, and that's why you're seeing also the growth.
You know, as all of us know, India is on the cusp of the world's largest democratic exercise. And one of the biggest risks the World Economic Forum flagged when you came up with your top global risks report was the menace of artificial intelligence and deep fakes, and the challenge this poses to electoral democracy. Given that this year itself we've already had a few elections in countries like Indonesia and countries like Argentina, how much of a threat do you think this is at this moment, given that in a few days from now our first phase of polling will begin for our Lok Sabha elections?
one has to be very vigilant about it. I think we can guarantee that the two of us are real here. What you see is real, but we have no guarantee that this can, of course, then be put into something deep fake. So I can be saying something else, and I literally has been saying if people play with it. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people believing that everything they look at in social media is true. So people do come up to me and say, yeah, but I read that on Facebook or read it on Twitter and said, okay, yes, then it has to be true. Maybe, but I think we need to learn that things has to be taken with a pinch of salt. And that is not necessarily the reality. So we have to vaccinate also against that people believe everything that is in the social media. You know, when I grew up, I read edited newspapers where there was an editor making sure that everything was correct in the paper. And the young generation now will need to maneuver in a situation where, of course, they look at the papers, and they are still very good. And also I know that India Today take big pride in that. But they also have to learn to take with a big pinch of salt what they're seeing in social media. But this is a reality. This will not change. It will just accelerate. And the whole artificial intelligence, the Gen AI, is a real game changer. We think it's as impactful as the internet, maybe even as electricity was. So the world is changing much faster, but one has to make sure that you use the AI to the benefit of humankind. And I think there's huge productivity gains that we can see in the coming decade, maybe even 30%. And productivity is really prosperity. If you can produce the same with less resources, you can pay people better, and you move up in the value chain. So you have to embrace it. Of course, we need traffic rules. And I think India is also uniquely positioned to gain from these new technologies, because you have digitally literate people, you have hardworking people, you also have the key critical mass when it comes to digital and digital services. So, but it has, of course, then to go through unicorns and to then become the big companies of the future.
Isn't that a very elite way of looking at artificial intelligence? Because we also have a lot of people who don't have the skills and could possibly be on the wrong side of the artificial intelligence Gen AI revolution, where they're left jobless, unable to find and unable to come to terms with a changing world. A lot of work can now be done through automation.
It is true that every change represents both an opportunity and a challenge. So we know that some countries were the richest one after the Second World War and are now lower middle income countries, and some of the richest countries in the world. So if you don't embrace the technology and use it proactively, you can lose out in this global competition. And of course, I'm worried that some of the new technologies can lead to a winner takes it all, because we've seen that in the platform economy. But at the same time, we also see that when you move from the hardware phase of it to the software phase of it, there will be unique opportunities for a lot of smaller and medium-sized companies. And I think the ecosystem in India is of that kind. And things do change. Like, you know, in Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum is based, 100 years ago, 95% of the population worked in the agriculture sector, and it was not producing enough food. Today, 3% works in the agriculture sector, and they produce too much food. And where did all those people go? Of course, they moved then to sectors that are producing higher up in the value chain. And that's why Switzerland is one of the richest countries in the world. So you also have to use the enormous resources in that labor to then produce more effectively and use that labor into other sectors. It maybe sounds very economically, but you know, it is really not more advanced than common sense. Unfortunately, common sense is not always that common.
Let's spend some time on the two big crises that the world faces. And I'll start with Russia-Ukraine, because For Europe in particular, that's the number one challenge. Given the fact that President Putin is stronger than he has seemed in the last 2 years, and that Ukraine, for various international reasons, is not being able to push back in the way that the world would have wanted, where do you see the Russia-Ukraine conflict go from where we're at right now?
So there were a couple of premises in your question that I would like to dwell on. So, President Putin wanted to take Ukraine. He thought he was going to take Ukraine in a week. And he is one of the largest military powers in the world. Wasn't able to. So Ukraine pushed back, and that was in a situation where they had no Western weapons. They had all old Russian weapons. Today, there is still an ongoing war. There's only losers in this war. Of course, in Europe, we're much closer to this conflict. And you know also how particular you are about your borders, and rightly so. And Ukraine is also quite particular about their borders. It's not that the borders were disputed. They were agreed in the Budapest Memorandum, the borders of Ukraine. So this is an ongoing conflict. When it comes to the Russian economy is still growing, but it's growing because it's now a war economy. Overall, we've seen 3 million people, young people, left Russia. These are young math teachers, scientists, and engineers. We're also very bearish on Russia's ability to diversify its economy in the years to come. So hopefully we will find a solution to the war in Ukraine based on international law. I think international law should always be at the basis of these kind of negotiations.
And when it comes to Israel-Palestine, given the fact that Israel has been bombarding and attacking different parts of Gaza, but still hasn't been able to achieve its military objectives, which was to wipe out the Hamas, and given what we're seeing in the Red Sea with the attacks of the Houthis, how do you see that war progress? What's your sense?
So I hope for a ceasefire. I hope for humanitarian assistance to the people in Gaza. I also hope for a solution in the future where the Israeli people and the Palestinian people can live friendly next to each other, also based on the two-state solution. It looks very complicated today, but of course, 7th of October, when Israel was attacked by Hamas in a terrible terror attack, has changed also the way many Israelis look at this, and I think also the way the world look at Hamas. But still, we should not forget that the aim in the future should be that the Palestinian people and the Israeli people can live peacefully next to each other.
Lastly, let's spend a moment on the most unpredictable election of all this year, the election in the United States. Give everyone...
Not the Indian one, I guess, huh?
Are you confused about what may happen?
No, I was, that was a rhetoric question. we have to live up after, gone through Gaza and the Ukraine. I thought we had to get back to a little bit more like bullish atmosphere, but you're, sorry.
No, more certainly. Given the fact that in the United States, at this moment, nobody can say with any degree of certainty what may happen in November, what do you think is at stake for the rest of the world, given that a lot of polls suggest that Donald Trump has a very serious chance of being re-elected as president?
So let me come to the essence of your question by just stating a couple of facts at the beginning. India is the fastest growing of the large economies in the world, fastest growing of the emerging economies. But the US economy is doing also really well. So a year ago, we were talking about the recession in the US. Then they said, oh, it will be a soft landing. There's no landing at all. The US economy is growing really strongly. There's a reindustrialization in the US where we see companies moving back to the US. We see an optimism in the US that we haven't seen for decades. And we are very bullish on the US economy moving forward. They have the critical mass, they have the large companies, headed mostly by Indian Americans. It's also very interesting. So the US is in a good place economically. The political system is not in the same good shape. It's very, very polarized, and that's going to continue until the elections. But I think the US can deal with this, and we have to deal also with the outcome of the US elections.
No, so I remember in January when we were at the World Economic Forum at Davos, one of your big themes of conversation in the corridors and the sessions was around what happens if Donald Trump comes to power. How do you see the response to that question? So what happens if Donald Trump gets re-elected?
So we can listen to what policies he wants to implement every day, so we can make our own assessments of that. The World Economic Forum is a neutral, impartial international organization. We had Donald Trump twice in Davos. We had also President Biden when he was vice president in Davos. So we will deal with the administration that the US people do elect. Of course, some nations, especially China, is very worried because you heard Donald Trump has said that he will put 60% tariff on China. He's also said that he will put 10% tariff on other nations. I think we will see more and more clarity on the policies moving forward. But as I was saying, the US is now a fast-growing economy under Biden, but the US economy was not doing badly during Trump either, especially before COVID. That was, of course, a game changer. But the policies that Secretary Mnuchin was responsible for as a Treasury Secretary was by many in the business sector in the US seen as a very sober economic policy. I guess you wanted more sound bites on this part.
No, that's fine. As you said, you're it's very Swiss, right? Very neutral, not wanting to lean in on either side, and that's totally understandable. Borge Brende, thank you very much for joining us for this session, and we will be hearing more from the President of the World Economic Forum in a session that we have later this afternoon, so do stay back for that. Thank you for your time, and thank you for coming here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much.